Well, listen, welcome here today to our task force meeting, and apologies for being a little bit late. You'd think after a year and a half of these platforms, we'd have them down, but always some challenges. But nonetheless, we're really glad to be with you. There are well over 200 of us here today who are participating in the Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force. I'm Wade Crowfoot, and I lead our California Natural Resources Agency and co-chair this task force with our regional forest chief, who used to be, of course, Randy Moore, but who now is Jennifer Eberlein. And we're really excited to welcome Jennifer, and of course, congratulate our friend and colleague Randy Moore, who now travels to Washington, D.C. to lead the U.S. Forest Service across the nation. So really excited with his leadership, and of course, Jennifer, your leadership as you come back to Region 5 in this leadership capacity. So first, I just simply wanted to welcome you and give you an opportunity to introduce yourself. As we've talked about, this task force is a big, broad, inclusive set of stakeholders: local governments, tribal governments, your colleagues in the federal government, lots of state agencies, fire safe councils, resource conservation districts, community leaders. It's really an impressive group of people, and it's a wonderful opportunity to give you a chance to introduce yourself to them.
Great. So good afternoon, everybody. And Secretary Crowfoot, thank you so much for the warm welcome. And I am so happy to be back in Region 5 and with all of you as Regional Forester for the Pacific Southwest region, and very excited when I heard about this group when I was talking with Wade, as well as my colleagues with the Forest Service and Randy Moore about this task force. So very excited to be a part of this. Just really quickly about me, you've heard me coming back that term. I was Deputy Regional Forester for about 4 years in this region. To the last couple of years, I stepped away to do some other assignments at a national level in another region, but certainly I'm familiar and very excited to return to Region 5. So I'm very happy to be here. I have almost 30 years in federal government. As I was telling some folks, I never thought I'd be saying that, but I have almost 30 years in the Forest Service, and I did work for the Bureau of Land Management for a bit as well. So have certainly been around the country as part of the BLM and the Forest Service. Like I said, very happy to be back in California and the Pacific Southwest region as well. So for me, I just want to acknowledge that this has been one heck of a year as an understatement, and I don't even know if we've got words anymore to describe how one of a kind, unique, challenging this past year and a half has been for us, certainly with starting with the COVID-19 pandemic and including just all of last year's response to the fire season of 2020. And I want to acknowledge that I believe today is the 1-year anniversary of that lightning siege that really started the record-breaking year of 2020. So, and this year is even off to a faster start than last year, with the Dixie Fire already the largest single wildfire in California history. And I know we'll get more details on our fire status from Chief Porter and Deputy Regional Forester Tony Scardina as well later in the program. And although we have a lot of challenges, as Wade was talking about, we have more alignment than ever for our federal, our state, our county, our tribal governments to really come together and see what we can do collectively in partnership. That collaborative spirit, that shared stewardship that we have throughout the state, and how we can get those cross-boundary projects to really work together and consider the needs and the desires of our local communities for health and safety for all of us. So I know it's really easy right now, guys, to look across the state and go, oh, where's places where it may seem that we're not aligned. But I want to assure you, from my perspective and how I walk into this job, is that we stand shoulder to shoulder. And yeah, we may ask ourselves really hard questions and ask each other, because that's what we do to get better, folks. That's what we need to do with each other. But we are with our state partners, with our county governments, with our tribes, local communities, and we need to stand together and working together in partnership. So I just want to emphasize that part of it right now when we're in these what crisis management for many of us at this point, but can we do that collectively and then strategically go forward together of what do we need to do together as a community. And then I'm going to hit this up. Wade and I had talked about this, and I'll go right out the gate with this one. I know that the misperception is out there that the Forest Service has this let it burn policy. I want to assure you we don't have a let it burn policy. Certainly Chief Moore, when he was regional forester, absolutely put the direction in place that we want to pause on the use of managed fire. He reiterated that direction when he became Chief Moore for the entire agency. This is common when you see conditions on the land, when you see our stretched resources across all of our jurisdictions, when we have, again, stretched resources and personnel, equipment, aircraft, coupled with all the dry conditions on it, we're going to put a pause on using managed fire. Every fire has a strategy around it. Every single one, looking at the safety, the conditions, and the resources available. So again, when conditions are different, we'll return to the use of managed fire. With CAL FIRE, we are aligned to use all of the tools in the toolbox, and that includes managed fire as well as prescribed fire. So just really simple, when the right conditions, right resources, right time, we are ready to go with managed and prescribed fire. So I'm gonna hit that one right out of the gate, since I know there's a lot of conversation, pros and cons about that direction that's been put out there. So anyway, I'll stop. I really look forward to hearing from everybody, to learning more about how we're working together. Just thank you for joining us, and thank you so much for being the committed partners that you are. Okay, Wade, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, I'm really gratified here, just two weeks into our working relationship. One, how constructive you are, obviously, but also how direct you are. This challenge really requires us to work together in new ways and to really cut through what's kept us apart or held us back in the past, to really achieve this action plan that our broad teams and the stakeholders in this discussion have put together. So group, we have an action-packed agenda here today. We're going to start off with an update on the fire conditions as we think about over 10,000 Californians who are currently evacuated from their homes, and over 10,000 men and women on the front lines fighting the wildfires. We're going to then hear about some promising updates on the federal and state budget, and then turn it over to Patrick to update us on progress since the last meeting. Then we're going to do a couple deep dives, including on our science advisory panel, which is a really important component of this, highlight some recent concrete partner accomplishments, and then discuss draft action plan deliverables, because this is all about executing on the action plan and on the shared stewardship agreement. So without further ado, we're going to turn it over to Chief Scardina and Chief Porter from the U.S. Forest Service and CAL FIRE, respectively, for an update on our fire season.
Okay, can you hear me?
We sure can.
Okay, and if Curtis, if you're looking in, okay, I see we've got Tony's slides up. Is Tony Scardina able to get in? We were working on that behind the scenes. Tony?
Chief,
And
I would
Curtis?
say we're probably working on elevating Tony to a speaker.
Yep.
So if you can
go
start,
ahead.
then Tony, if you can listen to us, you can chime in when you get speaker status.
Yep. So what I'm going to do is kind of give you just kind of an overview, and I don't know if I'm all right. Overview of what we're looking at, and I'm going to take you back just a little bit back to the early part of the season. And we've been well above normal in numbers of fires and acres burned to date from the beginning of January all the way through. And so we are still in that space.
And Chief, can I just interrupt you and ask you, are you trying to share a PowerPoint, or are you just presenting verbally?
I'm verbal right now. I was going to show the PowerPoint was Tony's, so I don't want to speak to the PowerPoint. So
fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm not talking to any slides. so we've been in that space. As Regional Forester Eberline just mentioned, we're right at the point in time when all of those lightning strikes occurred, and everything went off the charts for the rest of the season a year ago. We're coming into this space this weekend or over the weekend of being well ahead of in the early part of the season where we were last year to date. Those numbers might change. I hope they do. I hope we don't have a August and September and October like we did in 2020. But the conditions are ripe to have at least that bad of fire conditions and continue all the way through into winter period. We're going to see above normal fire activity and conditions to support that activity all the way into November and possibly December as the weather is showing us. So we need to be ready for that. We're preparing for extended deployments of our teams. We've already been rotating teams and to do such. And but going back and just looking at the last year, just quickly, in 11 months, we had 6 of the 7 largest and most damaging fires in California's history occur within an 11-month period. And I don't mean top 20, I mean they were 6 of the top 7 fires that have occurred, 6 of the top 10. And that's daunting. It's daunting in many ways. It's taking a toll on the resources for sure. It's taking a toll on communities, we've heard, and it's taking a toll on all of our firefighters and the efforts that we're all trying to do in this important group. But it emphasizes we need to look at all of the above in our approach to working through this, and we need to be committed for decades to come. We need to do forest management, including when it's right, bringing back prescribed fire into those acres. It's doing the fuel breaks and the fuels project work within those kind of intermix zones, doing the defensible space and the home hardening, all of those things, and having enough resources both on the federal side as well as the state side and local government to fight fires when we need to be fighting fires. And while we move toward a hopeful place where we can put more fire on the ground in a natural setting, or even allow acres to burn, we're very thankful that Chief Moore did stop the use of managed fire or the tactic of use of managed fire for the interim, and we will get back to it when conditions are appropriate to do so. With that, Tony, are you on? Okay, let's see if I can hear you. Can't hear you. I can see you.
We can see you, Tony. Can't hear you.
Close. So Curtis, if you can unmute Tony, yep, perfect.
Okay. And I think I want Tony, partly because on the fire side of things, we're really, most of the fires that are burning in the state are really on federal jurisdiction. And Tony, I want to give you the opportunity to talk.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Tom. Sorry it took me so long to get connected. You can pull a PowerPoint up if you want. If not, I'm going to go through this since we can stay on agenda. So, as Tom mentioned, you can go to the first slide. The other thing that, not only Tom and I are looking at, but collectively is the entire West, because that picture in the West has an impact on all of our capability. Right now, we have 117 active large fires across the West. And when you look at the Northern Rockies, in California and the Pacific Northwest, all of those are taking resources. So that amount of large fire activity is somewhat unprecedented. That's why we're at preparedness level 5, which is the highest that you can be at. And then when you start to look at Northern California, we're also at preparedness level 5 with 11 active large fires, which may not seem a lot, but when you put it in totality, you get what that picture looks like. For now, Southern California's had a little bit of precip, which gives us a little bit of a break. but that will come into the picture within the next month or so as things dry out in Southern California. If you go on to the next slide, it's just again painting that picture. These are the major fires that we have going on right now. As Tom mentioned, a lot of those are on national forests. The Dixie Fire, we're in unified command with CAL FIRE on that, which right now is the largest fire in California, the single largest fire in California history. The August complex last year was multiple fires coming together as one, which was the largest complex in California history. So it gives you that sense of what's a small fire anymore. The fires are bigger, the behavior is extreme, and the conditions are really unprecedented in terms of drought. And as we've talked even before Chief Moore's letter, here in California, our leadership in the Forest Service made that decision months ago, knowing what the drought conditions were going to be, that we were going to have aggressive initial attack. And then in terms of suppressing fires, we were going to do everything we could to keep fires small. And that happened in our leadership months ago. On the next slide, just one more thing. This gives you that picture. If you look at just a year ago compared to now, most of the West just a year ago was in, relatively moderate drought conditions. And when you think about what happened in mid-August last year and ran 100 straight days of preparedness level 5, 30 active large fires across the state, look at what we have to date, which is most of the state in that extreme or exceptional category. And it just is going to amplify the potential of large fire behavior really all the way through the fall and even potentially till Christmas. So, we think about the fatigue and the strain on our firefighters. And right now we're focused on their safety, and we're focused on making sure communities are safe in terms of life and property. And we're going to have to take the use of limited resources and focus on those priorities in terms of keeping people safe. So that just gives you an idea of what's ahead of us. And the good thing for us is that, as Tom mentioned, between federal, state, local government, contractors, and tribes, the system that we run is one of the best in the world, even though it's hard to manage fires in these conditions. So I'll stop there so that we can stick with the agenda. Thank you.
Tony, Tom, thanks so much. And I'll note for our participants, if you'd like to ask a question, we're obviously a large group, upwards of 250 people. So can allow verbal questions and get through this. But if there is a prompt on the screen here on a webinar, so you want to ask a question on this presentation or any other, please include it into the questions, and we'll see that it gets asked if we can. Just a quick question for you, Tom and Tony. The Dixie Fire is on everyone's mind, and how challenging it is given the conditions and the heat of that fire. What would you say as it relates to sort of the go forward on that fire?
Tony, you want to start?
Well, one, the next 48 hours, the conditions are not in our favor. A lot of that smoke is lifted, which gives oxygen and fuel to that fire. And we're going to have a couple of days that are going to be rough. The thing that we're going to be doing with CAL FIRE is looking at some long range planning, because again, the conditions that you're looking at on those maps, this fire wants to do what it wants to do. And even with 6,000 firefighters, dozens of aircraft, we are having trouble getting containment. That's about as honest as we can be. And so we're going to again look at how do we keep people safe first, how do we protect communities as best we can, and then where's the best chances on the landscape to catch this fire. And it's really going to take the collective knowledge of all the resources across federal, state, and local to figure out that strategy. So it's going to continue to grow, and we're going to be working on strategies about how we do our best to contain with the weather and field conditions that are presented to us. Tom?
Yeah, and Curtis, can you share my screen real quickly, or is it? If not, I wanted to just give you an idea of what we're looking at. Hopefully this is coming up. Can you see my screen yet? Yes? Okay, can you see my cursor spinning around, my arrow? Okay, the fire started way down here in the Feather River Canyon. It has burned all of this area here. The active parts of the fire are in 4 places now. This is in the Lassen National Park and the north part of Plumas going into Tehama County. This is right above Chester. This is right to the east of Westwood, and Susanville is right there. And then there's this piece to the south. This is in and of itself, here are four major fires that we are trying to manage. Quincy is where the federal team is. Here's where the CAL FIRE team is working out of. All these dots are resources around the fire. But anything that's red here is brand new, grew within the last several hours. New spots, new spread. Blue was last night. Red is just in the last few hours. We have lots and lots of fire on the ground. This is exceedingly resistant to our regular firefighting tactics and very much not wanting to go out. It's spotting sometimes a half mile ahead of itself when we get a little bit of wind, just because everything is so dry. So we got a long way to go, a really long way to go on this particular fire, and it is right now 4 fires.
Well, thank you. That's really helpful to understand the conditions in real time. And I think I speak for everybody when I, tell you we are with you, we're with the men and women on the ground. And, as you respond to these fires, we're going to spend the rest of the meeting talking about how we build our resilience to these conditions moving forward. So with that said, I'd like to transition us to an update on the state and federal budget. We know Governor Newsom and the legislature, President Biden and Congress are focused on getting resources to us in California. And let's hear from Jessica and Liz on that front. And I'll just confirm that they can actually present here verbally and over video.
I think you can hear me at least.
We can hear you, which is half of it.
Well, we'll see if here with some slides, and maybe you'll see my face, maybe not. But I'm Jessica Morse. I'm Deputy Secretary for Forest and Wildfire Resilience at the California Natural Resources Agency.
I want to pause and just, we've got some interference with Jessica's audio.
Does that work now?
Yep, I think, yep. Jen and I are going to take ourselves off video just to see if that helps with the transmission.
Great. So I am, really thrilled to be here with all of you today. And we've seen a huge investment in California's resources, and both our pace and scale has been increasing dramatically. Next slide. Over the last 5 years, we've seen the pace of the acres treated increase dramatically, and now we're seeing investments in resources increase dramatically. What we have had historically in California is a $200 million base budget starting in 2018, which is where you started to see our annual acres increase. And we didn't have resources at the scale we wanted with COVID last year, but now the governor has proposed a $1.4 billion budget this year, which has invested in a two-phase front. We received $536 million of this in early action, and $958 million was approved by the legislature in July, and we're continuing to work out the final details of that funding, but it brings it to nearly $1.5 billion for the year delivered between April and August. There's a little confusion where the budget is actually split physically between 2 accounts and 3 fiscal years, but the reality is we're seeing a historic investment in this calendar year for funding for wildfire resilience. Next slide. What we're seeing is really a two-phased approach. So the early action budget was designed because we all recognize that wildfires don't pause for budget cycles. And so the legislature and the governor worked together and delivered $536 million in April of this year, several months before what would be typical appropriation cycle. This was designed really for speed. The goal was to be able to fund identified projects that do wildfire resilience from fuel reduction to defensible space around homes and home hardening, to be able to really accelerate the speed of those projects and try to get them done a fire season ahead of their typical schedules. These projects typically take between 1 to 3 years. So by starting in April rather than July, we will have them finished before the upcoming fire season, before their potential fire season, depending on if they were 1 to 3 years. The next phase was really focused on scale. So this is the $958 million balance that is the top line, was approved by the legislature. They are currently negotiating. We hope to have a budget bill junior soon that will detail what those investments are going into. The goal of this proposal was to get us larger projects, so you could fund potentially an entire watershed. And rather than have that project interrupted by 3 grant cycles to get it done, we instead could actually get the entire project started, start to finish, completed at a larger scale. It also really addresses more of the structural hurdles that had been slowing our progress, such as expanding the workforce, investing in what to biomass, and creating an infrastructure around utilizing the forest waste coming out of these areas. And so together with this early action funding to get us at speed of really tackling these projects that have been identified that are excellent, that need to get on the ground now, and the remaining dollars to get us both speed and scale, really to take much larger projects and tackle many of and fund many of the areas identified through the Forest Management Task Force here, and to get us a structural foundation that will allow us to continue to work at an accelerated pace. Next slide. What's really exciting is that across these 3 fronts of fire resilience, we're starting to see real impacts. So when we invest in fire resilience, we invest across all 3 of these fronts work together. So inside of communities, we do defensible space and home hardening so that homes don't become the center of the fire. We invest around communities in that wildland urban interface with interventions like fuel breaks that allow us to slow a fire or evacuate communities out of a fire. And across that last level is really across the landscape where we are trying to return fire back to its normal intervals. So lowering that intensity of the fire, potentially having tools to slow the fire, and having tools to help communities withstand the fire. All 3 of those work together to deliver resilience. Standing alone, these are also good interventions, but they are not 100%. So together, they really add up to a full safety resilience regimen. Next slide. And then these are these structural reforms that are identified within the task force report, such as really anchoring our investments in regional strategies, making sure we're having science-based management, expanding the workforce, expanding the entire industry around utilizing forest products. So whether it's woody biomass, which doesn't typically have a market, or even traditional lumber, anything that's coming out of the forest, we don't want it pile burned, we want it utilized. And so trying to create an infrastructure that would allow us to actually move and utilize what would otherwise just be slash piles that could then complicate wildfires. And finally, we're doing a lot of regulatory reform work as well, which we'll hear about later. Next slide. So the early action dollars were received in April. And like I said before, most of these projects take at least a year to complete. I was really thrilled with the innovation around all of the departments that received these dollars to expedite the process. We also received some contracting relief from the state legislature, which allowed us to actually really expedite sort of the bureaucratic timeline to be able to just get projects on the ground as quickly as possible. So here's some photos. The Department of Fish and Wildlife has over 53 projects with their early action dollars. 10 of them are actually already finished, which is remarkable. You see a project outside of Elk Grove above that has sheep on the land. And we have projects on Fish and Wildlife land below where they're prepping sites and doing fuel reduction work. And so these projects are now ready in time for this fire season. Next slide. Our Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy in Southern California also received early action dollars, and they used some of it to invest in fuel reduction along Highway 101, which was a really high ignition corridor from cars creating sparks. And so you can see right there, they've already completed that fuel reduction along Highway 101. They also expanded a program they have that has volunteers go out on arson watch. So when there's high fire risk weekends or days such as red flag warnings, they send out local volunteers just to go keep an eye on high fire risk areas to act as a deterrent. And so over 4th of July weekend, that group identified some teenagers below who were setting off fireworks on Mulholland Drive in Los Angeles. You can see it was a heavy fuel-ridden area, and so they were able to call in local authorities and seize illegal fireworks and prevent that from becoming a wildfire. Next slide. We also invested down in San Diego County, and one of the areas that we've really invested in are these regional forest and fire capacity program through the Department of Conservation. They design regional strategies, and a lot of our funding across these different departments then go into projects identified through these regional strategies. This is a picture of San Diego County, and you can just see the variety of land ownership types throughout the area and jurisdictional overlap. And so what they've done is they had developed a really robust strategy down there for programs across those different boundaries. And so our early action dollars funded projects for the U.S. Forest Service, for example, to improve San Diego's watersheds and reduce fire activity on those watersheds. Early action dollars through the San Diego Conservancy funded the San Diego Resource Conservation District has already completed over 250 defensible space and chipping projects for lower income homeowners around San Diego so that their homes are protected for this fire season. Also funded a fire engine, for example, with the Barona Band of Indians in that area, which is what they said they needed as a wildland firefighting truck. And so to be able to respond to fires in the region. So what we've seen with these early action dollars and the entire forest and wildfire resilience budget is that it is taking a much more of a whole of government approach. This involves over 40 programs across 21 different departments, and they are anchored through these regional strategies so that whether it's Conservancy dollars, CAL FIRE Forest Health grant dollars, state parks or fish and wildlife funding, that it's going into a cohesive strategy across that landscape as opposed to being divided along jurisdictional lines like you see below. Because these wildfires aren't stopping for budgets, they're not stopping for boundaries. And so what we are doing is adapting our resilient strategy to meet the needs of California communities. So we're happy to support and excited to work with you. We are so grateful for all of our partners who have been working on the ground to deliver these dollars to your communities. And we are excited to partner with you in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. As we transition to Liz, just a quick question. So the early action dollars got out. Most of them, our early action dollars were approved in April. Most got out and working on projects. Then there's this amount of money that the legislature and governor have agreed on. And then the remainder of the legislative session, they're going to focus on very specifically how to allocate that funding.
Exactly. So the top line level, that 958 million, was approved by the legislature. So we know what's coming, and we are assuming that there'll be a great deal of consensus with our May revise and the legislature. But the legislature, now that they're back in session, are reviewing and need to give us an appropriated bill to then tell us which departments and which projects that 958 million can go into. And I also want to note that our early action dollars, that 536 million, over 85% of it is already committed in grants and awards, which is remarkably fast. It typically takes between 6 and 9 months to get grant projects awarded, and all of our departments did these in record time. Some of them turned them around in just a couple weeks. CAL FIRE launched its very large grant programs and opened its request for proposals months before that we even had the funding awarded to be able to expedite that timeline. So by getting this appropriation early and getting projects and our own internal systems working much faster, we were able to get projects on the ground and launched some in time for this fire season, and most, which was the plan, in time for future fire seasons. So we are really grateful for the incredibly fast work on the ground in these communities.
Thanks so much, Jessica. Let's transition to Liz and the federal budget update.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am hoping you can hear me okay.
I can hear you and see you.
Okay, great. So good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here with you and all of our partners today. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. I have some great updates for you to add on to the great news that Jessica shared. But first of all, I wanted to thank the state for the tremendous support with the California Climate Investment Funding for Forest Health and our Forest Legacy projects. This funding, combined with what we have on the Forest Service side and our other partner investments, just make a significant difference in helping us achieve these shared stewardship goals that we've been talking about. The number of projects, the types of projects, the cross-boundary work, the work with our tribes and other collaboratives will make a big difference for us in the state. So thank you. The next portion I wanted to share with you, for this short presentation is around the federal budget process. And as many of you have heard, the Senate passed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act last week. So that infrastructure bill includes $3.4 billion in new appropriations for FY22 to FY 2026, shared between the Forest Service and the Department of Interior. It also included a few policy changes. So I'm going to start with touching on the policy changes first. Of course, everything right now is proposed, but it really helps us to identify what these policy changes are, think about them in advance, think about the dollar figures that are being proposed so we can pre-position ourselves to be ready to act once something is finalized and moves forward. So on the policy end, I wanted to note a couple of items. The bill establishes a categorical exclusion, or CE, under NEPA for fuels breaks up to 3,000 acres. That focus on the wildland-urban interface and public drinking water source areas. The bill codifies our Joint Chiefs Landscape Restoration Partnership Program with the NRCS, or the Natural Resources Conservation Service, including $90 million for FY22 and 2023. It extends the Secure Rural Schools program and the funding there through 2023, and establishes an intergovernmental commission to recommend improvements to policies to prevent, mitigate, suppress, and manage our wildland fires and post-fire rehab. So now there are several big proposals in the bill to share as well. $500 million for community wildfire defense grants, $480 million for Forest Service firefighter salary and expenses, $400 million for Forest Service mechanical thinning and ecological-based timber harvesting, $400 million in financial assistance to purchase and process biomass, $250 million for prescribed burning, and $250 million for delineation of fire control points and building of strategic fuel breaks. Now, these are all things that we've been talking about for some time and are tied to our action plan, so this was very exciting news for us. Some of our existing authorities and programs are also going to be expanded. So this includes $160 million to states and tribes for Good Neighbor Authority projects, $150 million for landscape scale contracts, $130 million to establish a national revegetation effort, $100 million for collaborative and project implementation under the CFLRP, or the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program, $100 million for invasive species, and $108 million for state and volunteer fire assistance. I won't go through all the other line items there. These are some of the significant ones and tied directly to what we've been talking to in our task force. So as you can see, lots of changes, lots of increases in funding that we so desperately need. So we're really looking forward to seeing what the final numbers end up being here. So there's other funding as well, to support the burned area recovery and early detection of fires and satellite systems and remote equipment. There's funding for capital improvements, of course, around infrastructure, so our roads, trails, and recreation sites, as well as improvements for water quality and fish passage. So the bill is likely several weeks away from final passage, and although we know it can change, like I mentioned earlier, this is a real promising outlook for us in our shared work here in California. So right now on the Forest Service side, we're currently having discussions at both the regional and national levels, so we can strategize on how to act quickly if the bills are passed. We all know there's need for this larger investment, and we want to be able to respond as quickly as possible once the bill is passed. So, in addition to everything around the infrastructure bill, last time we met, I talked about the president's proposed 16% increase in the Forest Service and Department of Interior budgets. So we're also looking forward to some changes there. This funding would be a substantial increase over what we had last year for forest fuels management. So I know Jen and others touched on this. We've got a lot of challenges ahead of us, but we also have great opportunity. And so we know the Forest Service working together with the state are poised and ready to continue acting on what we need to do around wildfire and forest resilience. So these large increases in investment are going to make a big difference for us. So thanks again for the opportunity to speak today, and I hope to be able to share more final budget and funding updates with you next time. So with that, I will pass it back to the next person here. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Liz. A couple questions coming in from colleagues here around whether these numbers are in written form somewhere. I recognize that, as you point out, that it's a proposal at this point and not final. But is that information that's available publicly? And if so, is there a place to find it?
Yeah, it is available publicly. If you, of course, have to, scan through the bill and read through the bill. For some of our partner updates, we can provide our summary of looking at it right now. So Wade, I can share, and have shared with Jessica, so we can see what we can share more publicly from that overall summary of the bill and the ties that we have for the Forest Service and state work.
Great, thank you. And again, for those who are joining us today, you can ask questions in the questions function, and we'll answer them both in that questions function, and I'll try to verbalize them as well. And then Jessica, not for answering now, but just to be aware if it comes up at some point, a colleague asked how many acres of the acreage that you showed that's being treated was treated with prescribed fire and grazing. So that's just a question moving forward. But Liz, that's really promising. Really, really great news from the halls of Congress, and we'll keep our fingers crossed. And no doubt at our next meeting in November, we'll have some real certainty, and you guys will probably already be hitting the ground running, spending those resources.
Absolutely. Thanks, Wade, and appreciate you sharing the question about the numbers written down. That was a lot to rattle off in this meeting. So we'll find the right format and venue to get that shared more broadly.
Yeah, and I mean, most importantly, once it's finally approved, then being able to share, how that funding is trickling into the region. I know our regional partners will really care about that.
Absolutely. Okay, thanks, Wade.
Yep, great. Let's move on to Patrick Wright, our fearless director of the task force, for an update on our organizational progress as well as progress on key actions.
All right, thank you, Wade. And by the way, hopefully we've gotten our technical difficulties behind us. All of you who are following me as speakers, you will be able to be on video, on camera as you speak, and certainly fellow executive committee members, if you've got questions, you can be visible as well. So with that, as Wade said, I thought I would refresh our memories on where we've come with the task force just in a few minutes, talk about where we are now and where we're going. So Curtis, if you could put up the slideshow there. I could certainly introduce things as he's working on that. As many of you know, the task force action plan was launched in January together with the governor's $1 billion budget proposal, which really kind of enabled us to hit the ground running. He also issued an announcement a couple of months later reformatting the task force, as you know, to now include federal, state, local, and tribal representatives. As Wade and Jennifer have emphasized, our commitment to try to align ourselves and move forward together. We then had our first meeting in May where we kicked off a good part of our agenda. We got our various task force work groups formed. We have work plans in from virtually all of them. We have roughly a dozen different work groups. If you'll flip through down to the 4th or 5th slide there, Curtis. There we go. And then we've got a schedule looking ahead with a meeting in November. Hopefully, given the fire situation and COVID situation, we'll be able to do that this November in Southern California. And then we're going to alternate meetings, hopefully, between Sacramento and the regions. And really, as Wade said, really use these meetings to get the latest information out to people and to really focus on deliverables. We're not going to spend a lot of time on work group summaries. Instead, we're going to hit, where we're making progress so that you can be assured that the things are moving along. Next. And this is a key way we're doing it. We're using this program called Airtable, where we're tracking every one of the 99 actions that are in the action plan. As you can see here, we're already off to a good start with almost 10 of them either done or in the final stages. 20 of them are ongoing, roughly 19, 59 in progress, 11 not started. We will have this system in time for the next meeting, certainly up and running on our website, so that you can not only see what's moving forward and what's not, but who are the lead agencies, what's the work group, how you can be more involved, what the key decision points are for every one of these actions. We're determined to make this as transparent as possible and certainly encourage comment on how this is progressing once we do get it up and running on our website. Next slide. So with that, what I thought I'd do today, just in 5 minutes, is just kind of give you a flavor of the kinds of things that we are going to be showcasing. Under goal 1, as Jessica emphasized, probably the #1 thing going, of course, is this huge unprecedented infusion in state funding that's already making a difference on the ground, together with ongoing federal investments. And real pleased that we're already learning to match state and federal dollars with local investments on the ground. We have a prescribed fire strategic action plan that's underway. You'll hear about that a little bit later today. We've got reforestation and million-acre planning underway. Big movements on permit streamlining that you'll hear about, and workshops throughout the state to help forest landowners move forward. The next slide just gives you an initial flavor of the tremendous progress that CAL FIRE and others are making on the ground. This is just a snapshot of some of the projects that are taking place that are either by CAL FIRE or through CAL FIRE funding just in the last couple of seasons. Certainly doesn't include everything that's happening this season. As you'll hear about later, we're going to be expanding the system to capture all other state projects, local projects, tribal projects, federal projects, to be real clear and real transparent about the vast range of projects that are underway as we try to increase pace and scale. We'll also be giving you updates on the effectiveness of these projects. We're already hearing all over the state how these projects, fuel breaks, thinning projects, prescribed fire projects, are slowing down fires, they're providing anchors, they're improving forest health, etc. So we've got a great story to tell, and you'll be hearing more about that in the future. Next. On goal 2, of course, we're focused on communities. Fuel breaks, as I said, are making a big difference statewide. CAL FIRE is aggressively ramping up its inspections program with a particular focus on elderly and low-income communities, and expanding that program as the action plan and legislation directed to go year-round, together with a brand new home hardening program that was launched with 3 pilots this year with some new money in the early action budget. We've also got a growing network of county coordinators throughout the state. That's a great partnership that's forming now with the California Fire Safe Council to get them going, and a lot going on through ARB and other agencies on the smoke issue. trying to prepare communities for smoke and prepare remediation plans. Next slide. Goal 3 is where we talk about linking all of this effort to economic development, to recreation, to some of the state's other goals. So lots underway on wood utilization. We've got a focused market strategy going, a biofuel strategy, and a number of pilot projects underway to try to deal with feedstock barriers. We've just launched a new recreation work group with the help of a group called CalRec Vision to bring the Forest Service, the state, and local partners together to make sure recreation gets incorporated into all of our regional frameworks. And of course, we're going to be working very closely with our colleagues working on 30 by 30 and natural working lands climate smart strategies so that we make sure that our forest health and protection programs aren't dealt with in silos, but are linked very closely with those related state plans. Next slide. And then finally, our last goal is driving innovation and measuring progress. I'll let Chris Keithley and Loretta Moreno talk about that a little bit more today, but we're aggressively ramping up our ability to map and assess and track all of these projects. So you'll hear about that, and again, in just about a half an hour. Next. Or is that the last one? That's the last slide. I hope that gives you just a short flavor of some of the key items. Again, we're going to come back to at the next meeting with all of this information online, action item by action item, lead agency by lead agency, so that you can track along with us how we're doing and find out how you can be more involved at every level of the process. So thank you, Wade. Back to you.
Thanks so much, Patrick. And again, those 99 actions are articulated in the Wildfire and Forest Resilience Action Plan. And I think all of us know that. But if you have questions around specific action items and where they stand, please reach out to Patrick or his colleague, Kristen. And big thanks to all of you, or many of you anyways, that work in these different working groups that are driving forward these actions. We'll choose to highlight certain actions each meeting, but we know that there's a broad amount of work happening on all of those actions. Next, we're going to hear from our leaders of the Science Advisory Panel. Given the important central role that science should play in our management, we're really thankful to both Steve and to John for their leadership and looking forward to hearing the progress report.
Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot. You can hear me, John? Yep, cool. Okay, we got past it this time. Good afternoon, Steve Estoy, Director of the U.S. Department of Agriculture Climate Hub, and on behalf of John Giles, Professor at UC Berkeley, Forest Health, I'm just going to give you a quick overview on the status of the Science Advisory Panel. So as you know, both John and I are the co-chairs, and in coordination with Director Wright, and per that leadership guidance, we have two science leads, one from Pacific Southwest Research, Julian Akama, and then Chris Keithley, those of you on the phone know, Chief at FRAP. In terms of the scientist membership, the composition of expertise is going to reflect, as we just heard, the very action-oriented and applied aspect reflected in the task force and the action plan. So in that light, we're soliciting engagement from experts with that on-the-ground expertise and experience that align with the task force priorities, which some I'll speak to in just a moment, and relative to our engagement, but also have as reflective of the diverse geography and needs, stakeholder needs across the state. So as you can see on the slide, those are a subset of our guiding objectives. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read them to you now. In fact, I hope to make up a little bit of time, mindful that we're just a bit behind on the agenda. Next slide. Oh, that's actually the last slide, Curtis, that you have up. That's the first. Okay, thank you. And then next slide. Yep. So of the aforementioned priorities that you can see there in the box on the left of your screen, the graphic on the right was something that we prepared just to illustrate in the kind of the conceptual space and function that we believe will serve the scientific interest of task force leadership, the working groups, while being functionally valuable to the application of investment for that on-the-ground prioritization, planning, implementation, and of course, evaluation. Of course, and always with the stakeholder interests in mind. So both John and I view this panel a bit like maybe a wall or a sieve where we can filter and evaluate scientific merits related to these priorities for the leadership to consider, but also focus via scientifically sound lens those investments and activities tailored to the ecoregional and local interests. And of course, as things change, as the needs change, we are malleable in our approach so we can self-correct as the needs and demands dictate. Next slide, please, slide 3. Just want to here highlight something. So one of our first charges is to work on these regional profiles. There will be 4, 1 for each region. We're starting with the Southern California region now, which I'll speak to in just a moment. With a focus on chaparral. And you can, in these regional profiles will unpack and identify the key threats, challenges, and priorities that will ultimately help inform the regional strategies and help guide state and regional investments. You can see here what the draft contents are of these regional profiles. These will be somewhat different depending on which region we're focusing on. Just in the interest of time, I'm not going to read those. And then you can see finally the timeline for these profiles as we work through them. Final slide. Thank you. Okay, so as I just mentioned, we're starting with the Southern California regional profile. We're actually working on that now with a focus per leadership guidance on chaparral and shrubland management, noting that that's very unique from other ecoregions and ecosystems in the state. And you can see from the boxes on the left of the slide how we're proceeding over 4 building steps. And right now we're on step 1. In fact, we're working on this as we speak. We're conducting individual stakeholder listening sessions. That's allowing us to identify the priorities and concerns, put together the major challenges facing the region in question. And at the same time, we're concurrently working on a review and synthesizing the literature. From there, we'll develop and host structured but topically focused stakeholder dialogues, essentially kind of workshops, if you will, where we will we'll present the information, preliminary information, but also solicit additional input and further unpack key topics that will lead to the report. Of course, this report is very much in the spirit of co-production and will be co-developed by those stakeholders for more wide application and greater use. So in a sense, we're really just shepherding this process with a high degree of input and versus, really, as sometimes happens, creating a report in a scientific document. So the hope is that this is a useful model and will, as I mentioned, employ some variation of this for the future regional profiles. That is all I have. I hope I made up a couple of minutes there with my presentation. Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot.
So Steve and John, that's really helpful. I think that's quite informative and distilled. And again, huge thanks for your work and your leadership on this. Everything we want to be based on the best available science, and you all and your colleagues make that possible. So big thanks. Question coming in. Will these regional profiles and development processes complement or be integrated to support the regional priority plans being developed through the Department of Conservation program? In other words, is the science that's looking at the sort of based regionally going to inform the priority projects and programs that are being developed regionally?
That's absolutely the idea, yeah. And I saw Patrick just pop back on. I don't know, Patrick, if you have a comment on that.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think the key purpose of these strategies is to inform those regional frameworks. A lot of those regional collaboratives simply don't have the access to the latest science, the latest expertise. So hopefully it's going to be used to inform them. It's also going to help with state investments, whether it's CAL FIRE, DOC, Forest Service, et cetera. So the idea is to have a common understanding of what the key risks are and the key priorities in Southern California so that we can all be on the same page.
Thank you, Patrick. We got the crux of that. And just again, one sort of key lesson that we've learned in state government is the solution is not one size fits all from Sacramento. wildfire resilience is achieved across regions, and it differs by landscape and ecology across the state. So again, Steve and John, thanks for helping us tailor these strategies. And I know Kaylee and others that are leading the RFFC program at Department of Conservation are really thankful and will integrate this science. So big thanks there. We're next going to shift to hearing from Angie and Jessica on a couple of key partner accomplishments. As Patrick mentioned, these quarterly task force meetings are really benefit as a forcing function to achieve certain outcomes that we need to achieve to build our wildfire resilience. So let's ask Angie to come on screen and share with us some recent progress at CAL FIRE.
Great, thank you everyone. My name is Angie Lattis. I'm an Assistant Deputy Director for Climate and Energy at CAL FIRE. I get to speak to you for just about 5 minutes or less here today about the Forest Health Grant Program and our Early Action Grant Awards. Last May, I got to speak with you about some of our direct award process and the early action funding that came in. And as of last week, we were able to announce over $153 million in projects going to partners out on the ground in local and regional areas to implement their projects. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit more about that again today, and thank you so much for your time and attention. Next slide. So I let you know that we awarded 150.
I'm so sorry. We have the president of Csac, who James Gore, one of the executive committee members on. And James, you are welcome to ask a question, but I just wanted to make sure that you were recognized as Angie's doing her presentation. Okay, he's just saying hi. Go for it, Angie.
Hi, James. Great, thank you. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the funding, just to drill down a little bit more on some of the information that Jessica shared with us all. And it's meaningful this year because this is the first time in department history that the Forest Health Grant Program, which is an amalgamation of several activities, has received funding from the general fund, which is a really big deal, and thank you for that. And then we'll also just talk a little bit about what it means to have some greenhouse gas reduction fund funding and how that's different from the general fund. So this is because of the Wildfire and Forest Resilience BCP, so thank you so much to agency and to the task force for all the work you did to help fund the several departments and agencies that got funding this year. I put just down here the amounts for you all, $90 million in general fund money and $65 million from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund for a total of $155 million. Next slide. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about this slide that I've borrowed from CARB several years ago now, and a big thank you to CARB, who's a fantastic partner in helping us administer what ultimately are cap and trade revenues that go into this special bank account that the state has. We often refer to them as special funds, and that is what we call the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, or GGRF for short, which you may all have heard of. And then that money, after being deposited into the special fund, is decided by the legislature which state agencies and programs get the funding. And then those programs that are using GGRF are called California Climate Investment Programs. So we'll just move into the next slide, and I'll just touch one more time, or just dive a little bit more deeply into this idea. So CCI is a multi-agency, multi-department brand for GGRF funded programs. You can learn more about it. They just put out an annual report back in May, or at their website, climateinvestments.ca.gov. There's a lot of great information about, I think there are, by my count, 39 different programs, of which Forest Health is just one that are a CCI program. CAL FIRE itself has 5 CCI grant programs. So it's really exciting to be a member of the CCI family. Also getting some general fund this year means that we're no longer just a CCI program. We are just a CAL FIRE grant program with some standard state funding and some special funding. Okay, next slide, and we'll talk about the projects. So we now are announcing that we have 37 new projects as a result of this early action award. The average project size is over $3 million. The largest projects are $5 million and the smallest ones are $750,000. We talked in May about our 20 direct award projects, and we now are through the process of identifying 17 projects that we received through the solicitation. So $72.5 million in new projects that we announced last week. Next slide. If you want more information about the specific projects, you can, and how they fit into the rest of our portfolio. We have all of the GIS files for those projects on our online map, which is available at our website. You can both see how it fits across the state in the left screenshot there, and on the right, how you can get a little bit more information about who the grantee is, what the name of the project is, and how much funding they're getting. You can also scroll through the project list and click on a project and it will zoom to that project. And then this is my last slide. If you want to find out more information about each of the projects, you may have seen our press release, which went out on Thursday. If you'd like to see a copy of that, that's also available on CAL FIRE's communications webpage. You can also come to the Forest Health webpage, which has a list of all of the projects, which has that same information that we just saw, project grantee, title, amount, and a short project description as provided by the grantee. And also we have contacts if you want to find out more about projects in your area, or if you have a project and you want to connect with CAL FIRE about how you may be able to access some of the upcoming funds from the new budget. There's a list of contacts there. We also have a CAL FIRE grant webpage if you'd like to know more about fire prevention grants, urban community forestry grants. I think CFIP is linked on there, but as I mentioned, there's a number of other CAL FIRE programs that receive CCI funding and GGRF, and general fund. And so if you want to find out more about that, just find us online, fire.ca.gov, and of course my contact information is here if you have any follow-up questions. Thank you so much for your time.
Angie, thanks so much. That's a lot of information. And I think a lot of people in this discussion are kind of the initiated and understand the alphabet soup of our different programs. But one of the questions that came in earlier is whether task force members can see the PowerPoints afterwards. So I just put that to Kristen and to Patrick around being able to provide these PowerPoints because they really are informative. So big thanks, Angie. That's a huge deal on CAL FIRE's part to get that funding out the door. And back to you, Jessica, on the Cal VTP permit streamlining. The first thing you have to do is break down that acronym for us.
Yes. So one of the biggest challenges we hear consistently in the forest and wildfire resilience sector is people are wanting to go out and do projects that are reforestation or prescribed fire or grazing or domestication, and they get slowed down by CEQA process and our permits and additional and environmental permitting. So what's happened is that we're grateful for all of the nonprofit environmental NGO partners, collaboration across multiple agencies that have come together to help us establish a single application that now delivers three permit processes for you for specifically your wildfire resilience projects. So anything that's doing fuel reduction or reforestation is applicable under this new process. So the anchor permit is called the Cal VTP, which stands for the California Vegetation Treatment Programmatic Environment Review. It's a 20 million acre analysis that was done across all of the high fire risk non-federal landscape in California. So that's typically where all of our state dollars go, and anything that could trigger CEQA. And so the CEQA process was taking about 2 years, but because the Cal VTP process did an analysis across all of those landscapes in advance, it's timeline down to about 3 months. So now what applicants have to do is they just do their actual physical boots on the ground analysis on the project that they're going to do. So they go and they look for what types of species are there water course crossings, are there biological sites. So they just do that actual boots on the ground environmental review. And then the Cal VTP lists out the mitigations they have to take to be able to protect the assets that they found on the ground. So that is a much shortened timeline without diluting the quality that's required. We are so grateful for our other departments and partner agencies that have actually come together to even further expedite this process. So now the CEQA process has gone down down to about 2 months. In addition, the Department of Fish and Wildlife took a very innovative approach. Because the CalVTP lists out specific mitigation steps you have to take, and potentially when you're doing a fuel reduction, trigger CEQA, and then you could trigger a species incidental take permit or different permits from Department of Fish and Wildlife. Department of Fish and Wildlife integrated their permit mitigation requirements into the CalVTP. So for example, if it talks a lot about, it directs you to avoid species take and learn how to do buffers around certain types of species you encounter. So the Department of Fish and Wildlife built their environmental standards directly into the CalVTP. When you're doing a VTP project, you actually cannot trigger one of these additional permits from the Department of Fish and Wildlife. So they fully integrated in there. So now you've got your CEQA taken care of. You're not going to trigger any additional incidental take permits or that kind of stuff from a Department of Fish and Wildlife, because you're already taking the mitigating impact, the mitigating steps to not need those permits. And then the was the state water boards took a very innovative approach. They established a statewide water permit for which the CalVTP is automatic enrollment. So when you're doing a project, you could trigger potential waste discharge or something like that. They now have an automatic enrollment. If you need one of those permits, when you get your CalVTP, you're enrolled, so these standards apply. And on the back end, we then send the project-specific analysis, so that boots on the ground analysis that was done, directly to the water boards so they can review it, permit that you're automatically enrolled in. So now the CalVTP is a 3-for-1 permit. And I apologize if I've oversimplified it for anyone. I was trying to make it very accessible to the public, but I hope I don't have any lawyers, kind of banging their heads right now. But what it does is it essentially gets you your CEQA, your water boards, and your fish and wildlife permits in a single application. And it's specifically for fire resilience activities on the landscape. So we are so grateful for the innovative approach here. I think it's pretty novel. I don't know that there's another 3-for-1 CEQA permit out there, but this should shorten your timeline dramatically. And also there's no additional fees with it. The last thing we have going is a project through the State Board of Forestry, which is getting us, we're pulling together a contract right now that will allow us to do up to 40 project-specific analyses across different types of landscapes and geographies and vegetation types in California. So that when you go to do your CalVTP project, there will already be somebody that's done analysis in a redwood environment or a chaparral environment. So they've pulled the mitigations out that you'll need to follow. It simplify the process and create a very consistent standard so that we're not leaving it up to interpretation in terms of how people execute this. So just so grateful for this multi-agency innovative approach. It has reduced the timeline on for fuel reduction activities dramatically, and is allowing us to get projects on the landscapes much faster at an pace.
Thanks, Jessica. Thank you. And I'll just note that there are some questions, a couple questions that have come in. David asks, when are the fire prevention grants being announced? And hopefully Kristen can answer him in the question and answer. And then Steve identifies county roadside vegetation being out of control, and that this work is shovel ready. And if there's a way to receive sustained funding, counties can clear vegetation from beside their roadways. So would be helpful to respond to Steve's comment in the Q&A as well. Let's move on and discuss some important draft action plan deliverables, including a prescribed fire strategy, the interagency tracking system and data hub, so we can actually measure our progress in a concrete way. And then lastly, these regional frameworks that we've touched on. So starting with Len on prescribed fire. You are still muted, and if one of our tech managers can unmute Len, that would be much appreciated. Not yet. We need to unmute Len so he can provide this presentation.
It says that he's self-muted on this end.
Thanks so much. Len, if you see a red button with a microphone, give it a click. He sees it. He's still having that problem.
We're definitely getting better at reading lips.
Probably not that good.
Len going, I did push it. It's not working.
Interesting. Well, I wonder if we can move to the presentation on the Interagency Tracking System and Data Hub, and then we'll get back to Len and help him with his tech. So if we can, I think we've got three folks. I know Loretta's first name, C. Keithley, C. Ramirez, and El Moreno. All right, let's give it a try. If you want to unmute yourselves and come on screen, we welcome your presentation.
Thank you, Wade. This is Chris Keithley from CAL FIRE. The Monitoring, Reporting, and Assessment Work Group, I'd like to thank the work from Loretta and Carlos, my colleagues on this work group. Really two main aspects we're trying to address initially. That's to improve our coordination on how we track and report fuel reduction projects across our partner agencies. And secondly, how we share information, invest in common data sets, share that with planning groups, the public at large, through a forest data hub, which was a concept introduced in the action plan that Wade discussed earlier. If I could get the next slide. What we'd like to share with you today then is a demo on a CalMapper, is CAL FIRE's fuel reduction reporting system. We're very close to releasing a public version of that tracking system, and that's really an initial phase of our project work, is to release CAL FIRE's application in the coming weeks. Then we'll broaden out that reporting. We'll provide a template and try to provide tools along the ways for our state partners to track fuel reduction projects consistent with the methodologies we've developed within CAL FIRE, with the ultimate goal of being able to develop unified reporting across both federal and state agencies. So without further ado, if we could get Mark Rosenberg unmuted and sharing his screen, he'll be glad to provide a brief demonstration of that CAL FIRE viewer for you. Thank you.
Can you guys see my screen?
I think they can, Mark. Go right ahead.
Great, thank you. So this is CAL FIRE's Fuels Reduction Projects dashboard. It's powered by the CalMapper database. I just first want to point out that a lot of this work, this dashboard work, was done by Rebecca Furkovich, who's not here. She's on a fire, so I'm standing in for her. What you see here is an overview of some draft data. This is draft, so it doesn't include all of our project information, showing the number of projects and the acres treated this fiscal year as well as last fiscal year. We also have a definitions page here, well, a short out about this application page and data, and then a definitions page here that has a lot of the definitions for the features that you'll see here and the categories that are displayed in terms of fuels reduction projects. There are a number of other features here which I'll show. There's the treatment acres by treatment objective. So in this definitions, we've got these broadcast burn fuel reduction activities, treatment objectives that you can see acres treated for the last fiscal year. And since we just started with this fiscal year, there's only a few acres that have been completed. You can also see how we can keep track of our progress towards our goals, which are established in CAL FIRE by Director Porter. So this is the overview page that you would come in first, and you can also see and explore the data via a map. You can zoom in and look at different features on the landscape, and you can identify them and get a little pop-up in plain English about the project or the treatment. And then you can move to a list view where you can see a specific project and see the pop-up information about that, as well as some of the information underlying the activities that were done and when they were done, including some bar chart information there. And you can also do that for the previous fiscal year if you had projects that you wanted to look at over there. Broadly, the data will be updated on a monthly basis. We hope to release this application in the middle of September after our next update. The reporting is broadly around treatment objectives and activities, and we hope that this can provide a reasonable template for interagency reporting as well. And with that, I guess, Chris, I will pass it back to you.
Thank you, Mark. That's great. We will, when that application does become available publicly, we'll work with Patrick Wright to get the link, the web address link shared with people throughout the task force. In terms of how we expand this reporting to our partner agencies, we also, through the work group, we're starting to develop a template that our state agency partners can use for shared reporting, and we'll work on reaching out to our partners on how they can utilize that template and start to build on the consistency of reporting across our programs. In terms of that vision of being able to share information on common types of vegetation management across our programs, I would like to recognize we've had some early work at that, both in previous task force and internally. I'd like to recognize both Rebecca that Mark mentioned and Kelly Larby and Mark himself. We've had a number of people within CAL FIRE, and I'm sure there's others in partner agencies too that have been working towards this over the years. So we'll certainly want to take their advice as we start to build a standard methodology in that. We have a good example of how that can be done, or that we did to support an MOU to protect northern spotted owl and California spotted owl and Fisher. If you go to FRAP's main web page, you'll find a link to that. And in the interest of time, we won't be sharing a demo of that today. But if you're having trouble finding that, certainly feel free to reach out to me and I'll be glad to share that link to you. With that, I'd like to pass the baton to, I believe, Carlos for a short overview of the Forest Data Hub concept.
Hopefully you can hear me all. Hi, I'm Carlos Ramirez with the Information Management Remote Sensing Lab Group with the Region 5 Forest Service. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. One more. Actually, one more. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to talk briefly about the Forest Data Hub. This is part of the Forest Inventory Monitoring and Assessment Working Group. As Chris pointed out, in terms of how we're envisioning the Forest Data Hub, this is really envisioned to be a multi-institutional data repository. There are modern ways of storing data that improve and simplify self-service consumption across heterogeneous data sets. The Data Hub would provide a robust solution to meet the needs of users throughout the state. agencies often have massive amounts of data spread across a lot of disparate systems. The way the data hub is envisioned to operate is it would unify these data sets, bring it into one authoritative data source that individuals could access to be able to help with different aspects of forest and vegetation management throughout the state. And the idea would be that this would be deployable in any environment, whether it's a state system, IT infrastructure, or some sort of cloud platform that would meet the needs of the data hub. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the data hub would tie together a lot of different data sets from different agencies. It's important that this would allow for a rapid exchange of information so that we're dealing more in near real time for accessibility of different data sets. One of the key intentions of this would be to connect data producers and data users. The data really needs to come together in a way that's meaningful and consumable for land managers and the policymakers that are relying on these data sets. And so this would provide that mechanism to do that. And then this would be really a single point of trust that would simplify data governance requirements and provide a persistent central location for these data sets around forests. Next slide, please. So this would provide, as mentioned, a next generation mechanism for accessing data. Part of what we envision is also connecting potential users of the Forest Data Hub with not only the data itself, but reporting capabilities, as well as linking those data products with tools that would help with analyzing and interpreting the data for different applications. And currently we're looking at a phased development approach of over a 24-month time period. Next slide, please. So we have a couple of examples here. They're not the data hubs in the truest sense because they're developing and storing data from one specific agency or entity. In this case, we have the USGS data portal that they maintain. It pulls together geospatial information, different natural resource information, real-time data. So in terms of a heterogeneous data landscape, this is a good example of that, but it doesn't pull in data from other agencies. Next slide, please. And then I suspect a lot of you are already familiar with the CalAdapt site that is maintained by UC Berkeley. And this again is from the true IT sense of it, not a data hub, but again, does provide different data sets and tools that allow users to easily consume the data for their specific climate change related applications. Next slide, please. And we've developed a work plan around the development of the Forest Data Hub. Here we have just a few of the milestones listed, major milestones, I should say. Part of the one of the important major milestones is surveying user groups or that stakeholder engagement to make sure that the key requirements are captured. After all, if a Forest Data Hub is built that isn't useful to end users, then we've wasted our time. So starting to do those engagements come October of this year, and then developing a full scope of a draft work plan in spring of 2020. Prior to that, synthesizing the user requirements to then fold into the work plan, and then releasing a contract and the associated scope of work sometime in summer 2022, and currently envisioning development to start in early fall 2022. And the last point I'll make is I don't have a slide for, but a topic we'll cover at a future meeting. Of course, no data hub is complete without data. We'll cover specific investments in a lot more detail next time, but one such potential data set that would tie into the data hub would be light detection and ranging data, or LiDAR. Patrick had a nice LiDAR visualization on one of his slides. That really gives us an unprecedented way to quantify and analyze forest structure, wildlife habitat, fuel loading, and characterize other natural resources on the landscape. Also investments in change detection and treatment tracking, using advanced algorithms to readily digest Earth observation data to monitor our changing landscape and changes associated with treatments. And then making investments in forest inventory data so that we remove the time lag that's associated with trying to estimate changes from mega disturbances. All of this to improve the data we collect and are analyzing for making decisions on the ground.
Got it.
And that's it.
Well,
thank you.
Carlos, thanks so much. And Chris and Mark and Loretta and really everybody that's working on data. You know, reminds me of the old adage, you can't measure you can't manage what you don't measure. And I think we're all committed to improving, tracking our progress on these projects and also managing data to really optimize the work that we're doing. So if you are part of a state agency, just know that we are intensely focused on really building off CalMapper to ensure that we're tracking progress and rolling up our progress as state agencies. And then more broadly, this Forest Data Hub is going to be helpful on so many dimensions of our work. So big thanks. Let's shift back to Len and see if he is able to talk to us and share the update on the prescribed fire strategy.
All right, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
We sure can.
Yay.
Yay. Okay. All right, let's start with the first slide. Okay, here we go. My name is Len Nielsen. I'm a prescribed fire staff chief for CAL FIRE. This presentation is actually brought to you by myself and my co-leader, Lance Noxum from the U.S. Forest Service. However, Lance is assigned to a fire up in Washington right now, so I will try to do it solo for today. So thank you again. So next slide. Perfect. A big thank you to all the work group members who drafted this collaborative effort over the past year. This strategic plan has really taken that long to try to build to where we are today. This is an important key environmental issue that we look for fixing, or at least making it a lot better than it has been for not only this generation, but for generations to come. The plan has been reviewed by several partners, just to name a few: CAL FIRE, Forest Service, CARB, CAPCOA, the Fire MOU Partnership, the Watershed Research and Training Center, and some tribal representatives, to name a few. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, one more thing. The 4-year plan sets out an overall vision which showcases ongoing accomplishment and explains the key action groups through the work group through the year 2025 and beyond to maintain successful forest resilience. All right. I'm on the need slide. Are you coming back to the need slide? One more back. Back to where it says need and vision. There we go. We know that between 10 and 30 million acres are in need of fuel reduction treatment to protect California. A significant portion of this will need to be prescribed fire. It is the best and in many cases the only viable tool on large portions of the landscape. The strategic plan establishes the vision to continue to address this need. By 2025, California will have the policy, programs, capacity, and knowledge to effectively deploy sufficient prescribed fire, cultural burning, and managed fire to meet our ecological, climate, public safety, public health, and cultural needs. Next slide. We are in the process of developing specific targets for inclusion in the strategic plan. And currently, I would say we're about 95% complete for addressing those targets and goals. Overall, the intent is for the collaborative efforts of state and federal agencies, tribes, private landowners, Local jurisdictions and others will help us reach the 1 million acre goal set forth of treated landscapes of fuel reduction with prescribed fire as one of the main treatments. Next slide. The strategic plan calls out 9 specific goals that we will review, starting with 1 through 3 here. First, develop a robust workforce, streamline regulatory barriers, and protect public health. As you can see on the slide, we have some meaningful accomplishments and successes, such as the state certified burn boss program. First class ever was completed in April of 2020 of this year. Under streamlined regulatory barriers, we have accomplishment of the Cal VTP EPEIR, which was mentioned earlier from Jessica. Our Cal Fire online burn permit program set to unroll in fall of 2021, hopefully in just a month or so, in constant effort and collaboration with CARB and air quality districts. Protect public health. There's a smoke spotter app and increase availability in burn days. We have key actions and challenges identified for all the goals and strategic plan, which are in depth in the plan that I can share later on. Next slide. For strategic plans 4 through 6, build public support, facilitate larger burns, and empower the private sector. The Prescribed Burn Associations, which is the number 6 goal here, talks about that's the map of California, and where the blue polygons are counties where Prescribed Burn Association already in place and burning. That's impressive. Folks from the UCCE like Linya Quinn Davidson and Jeff Stackhouse have really done a great job over the last few years in supporting the private sector with prescribed fire. And if you would like more information on prescribed fire and PBAs, they have a real simple website of calpba.org for more information. Next slide. Strategic plan goals 7 through 9. Expand cultural burning. Use managed fire as appropriate, as mentioned earlier today. Improve data collection and use, which we just heard from Chris Keithley and his team on how we're going to improve that. Specifically, I'd like to mention on this slide, cultural burning. Cultural burning is really taking off and improving and expanding. New groups and old groups are really coming together to really improve and increase its use. Groups like the Indigenous Peoples Burning Network, doing some really good work in the collaborative sessions that they've been having. Next slide. All right, next steps. The next steps we need to do, what's coming up? Well, we're finalizing this strategic plan for release, hopefully in the fall of 2021, to be finalized hopefully by the end of September, just a month away. We're asking people to give initial feedback, and we're asking you to send myself or Lance any comments or concerns in order to review the plan, so then we can incorporate them and address them as necessary. This plan will be available for review by key stakeholders within this month, and we would like to know if you would like to help and participate. Next slide. Here's my contact information. Again, Len Nielsen of CAL FIRE, and Lance Noxon's information. His real name is Bill or William. And so there's our contact information for you if you'd like to reach out to one of us and ask any questions, and we can make the plan, the draft plan, be available for your review. And then last but not least, I'd like to turn over for Patrick to talk about our draft action items. Patrick, are you there?
I am. Thanks, Len. Hopefully you can hear me. If you go to the next slide, Curtis. I just wanted to join Len in walking the group through some of the really challenging issues that we're working through and trying to get this thing done. As Wade said earlier and Jennifer did, we are absolutely committed to ramping up prescribed fire and managed fire, but to do that in a way that's smart, that's effective, that is safe, that protects public health, that deals with smoke issues. It's not going to be easy. But we're committed to doing it, and we're committed to doing it in a way that aligns where the feds are going, where the state's going, where the tribes are going. This screen gives you a flavor of some of the big ticket items that are projected to be in the plan. One of the reasons why we do not have a draft plan is we're waiting legislative review of a number of issues, including liability issues, tribal involvement. We're working with ARB on smoke mitigation programs. We're working through the budget process on a long list of programs here. So hopefully within several weeks, we'll have a draft that's out for everybody to review. But I just want to reassure everybody that we're committed to ramping up the pace and scale of both prescribed fire and managed plan in a way that brings the feds, the tribes, and the state together so that we can get the kind of pace and scale that we need. So thank you again, Len, for your leadership on this, and we look forward to working with everybody to make this work.
Thanks, Patrick.
Yeah, thanks. And I gotta say, it's quite impressive that both CAL FIRE and U.S. Forest Service, you all, I mean, Len, Chris, Mark, Carlos, you continue to drive forward on building resilience, even as, you and colleagues are responding to the fires this summer. I think we all agree that we need to reintroduce fire in a safe way back onto the landscape. And this strategy is going to be a big part of that. So if you're participating here today and you want to provide input on this prescribed fire strategy, please do reach out to Len and Lance. We want to be informed by your input. We're running a bit late, but I wanted to at least start the conversation with our colleagues driving the regional frameworks. We've talked, there you are, Kaylee. We've talked about the importance of this regional approach, and you and colleagues are driving it. So don't feel the need to give your entire presentation here in the next 5 or so minutes, but do help us understand what's happening at the Department of Conservation and how it's supporting the action plan implementation.
I like the Department of Conservation slip up because it's kind of fun. All right, I'll try to do this. I'll try to do this quickly and jump around the presentation. So today we wanted to give you an overview of how we are putting together the framework. I mean, this kind of structure of a regional framework that all of our different overlapping, complementing and aligned programs can fit into. And the goal with this whole effort is to develop something that doesn't override any one jurisdiction, but really provide some simplicity and some order to how we all work together towards our shared goals. Next slide. So this first map, and I won't go too deep into it, but it gives you just a small slice of overlapping jurisdictions. This is the Forest Service and CAL FIRE lines, as well as the local fire collaboratives that are they're spread throughout the state. What this shows me is that we have, with these, and then if you add on the water board lines and the, everyone else's, we have a whole lot of different corners of the state and federal government looking at our forests to meet their larger policy needs. And we need something to help organize that work towards something that's got a multi-benefit focus, but also something that is coordinated. Next slide. So the Regional Forest Fire Capacity Program was created to kind of start the ball rolling with this coordination. And what it really was meant to do in the shortest form is help regions kind of gain a leadership role in developing equitable project pipelines that can feed up to state and federal forest health fire prevention programs. Through that program, we have pretty simple deliverables. The regional entities under the RFFC program who are given block grants develop regional priority plans, lead develop project pipelines, and do demonstration projects. Next slide, and then I'll spin forward fast. So this is really the meat of it. We have been working, and I should give credit to Jerry Bird and his colleagues at the Forest Service. We have been working really closely with our federal partners in developing a framework that these different efforts can fit into. So in this slide, you have the framework. At the highest level, we have what we are calling areas, and those areas are, kind of in simplest terms, like common sense ways to divide the state up into 4 pieces. This was a huge lift to get the state to divide the state into 4 pieces, because as you can imagine, everyone has a different way to think about ecoregions, political regions, et cetera. So we wanted to kind of neutralize that and just try to put together 4 parts of the state that can be used for information sharing, network development, practitioner relationships, and tackling bigger problems like workforce, materials management, etc. At the second tier of this framework, we have the RFFC, the Regional Forest Fire Capacity Program regions. And these are the defined areas in which the Regional Forest Fire Capacity Program grantees are doing their planning work and their project development work. As you see in this picture, this is kind of breaks it down through the tiers. This is the northern area of the state broken into the 3 Regional Forest Fire Capacity grantee areas, the North Coast Resource Partnership on the coast, the Tehama County RCD Coalition in the northern part of the Sacramento Valley, then the Napa County RCD Coalition across Lake Napa, and then down through the southern part of that area. And then on the bottom is really where the work happens. It's the collaborative scale work that we're all familiar with. I just should point out that, collaboratives are best known in the Forest Service lands, but when we think about collaboratives, we think about collaboratives as wide-ranging as, fire safe councils and homeowners associations in Southern California to resource conservation districts working with private lands in the Santa Cruz Mountains to the Forest Service land. So these are really just like people coming together to solve problems at the localist level. Next slide. So here we have a closer view on how these tiers come together. First tier, the areas, which you've seen. Next slide. These were the first phase of grantees under the Regional Forest Fire Capacity Program, listed here. We'll post them later. Want to show how we're successfully covering the state. Next slide. These next grantees have been brought on with the early action funding that was provided earlier in the year. I would say we are starting to cover most of the fire-prone parts of the state, but we have some important gaps to fill. Next slide. And we are really looking towards the budget money that's being negotiated now is helping us expand into these most critical areas. Some of these just I'll flag, Riverside County is a big area we need to fill in more. We're talking to the Rivers and Mountains Conservancy about the San Gabriel watershed. And then, the other areas we're looking to leverage our existing grantees like Southern Sonoma County, talking to the North Coast Resource Partnership and bringing that piece in that falls outside of their existing jurisdiction. Next slide. Let's go one more slide over. One more. Next slide. Just one last mention. I want to just underscore how important the partnership with the federal government has been with Forest Service on developing this framework. The shared stewardship advisors have been just absolutely critical in stitching this together, the work from the smallest scale down in the first tier all the way up to the top tier and to the task force. And that is just due to tremendous heroic work from individuals at the service. Next slide. And then fiscally and also organizationally, the Forest Service in their zone model and funding, they really worked hard to align their funding and their implementation in zones that align really well with how the Sierra Nevada Conservancy is organized in the subregion and others. So that's been a huge help. Next slide. I'm gonna see if I can. And then I think I'm going to leave it here, and we're going to have to come back to. I had Karen Gaffney from the North Coast Resource Partnership to give us a more deep dive into kind of their work as a grantee, and I think it would be good for us to revisit this presentation and kind of go deeper at the local level. But I wanted to just give you, as the task force members, a sense of what the deliverables are that we're going to kind of present to you, so you can judge if we're doing a good job. We talked about the regional profiles with the science advisory team. The Regional Forest Fire Capacity Program regional plans, those will feed up to the task force. We want those plans to be project oriented. We want them to create those pipelines of work that our programs fund. But we also need those plans to give us a sense as statewide and leaders to understand how we are doing at achieving resilience. We are working on developing pillars for measuring resilience across these regions, and measuring them in a consistent way that is both, responsive to the local needs, but also gives us some way to look across the state and measure success. We don't want to saddle our locals with the responsibility of setting aside project-oriented work to achieve these pillars. So we are working hard at the state level through the data work we just heard about and elsewhere to bring to the regions toolkits to help them do this work. And then kind of I'll just jump to the last thing. All of this wraps up to, we really want to develop long-term funding strategies. Sorry about that. Long-term funding strategies to make these plans active documents that guide how you are staging work over 10, 20 years. We need to kind of pull these collaboratives out of the competitive grant cycle chase, and we've done a really good job working with CAL FIRE, and they're just, incredibly impressed at how flexible our programs are. And I think as we develop these frameworks, we'll even have more ability to build the trust that's needed to do that kind of long-term planning and implementation that is more akin to like a big long-term infrastructure, plan than what has been seen as a traditional natural resources type funding strategy. So I guess I will leave it with that. I look forward to diving more into the local level at the next meeting.
Kaylee, thanks so much. And we will want to hear from Karen at our next meeting and really talking about the work of the North Coast Partnership, which is really a model for this regional work. And it's quite impressive. Speaking of impressive, hopefully, Jen, you got a sense of the whirlwind of concurrent activities that's happening just across our federal, state, local, tribal governments. It's really impressive. Speaking candidly, I think we're still getting a sense of how much we can cover in these meetings. And we definitely packed this meeting chock full. We're also obviously smoothing out the technology. And then, if we're together in Southern California at the end of the year, it'll obviously be a longer meeting and allow for different, rich sidebar conversations. But I, for one, am really energized. I think this action plan and the task force is just what we need to have a structured, a framework for moving forward, and just really thankful for the partnership that we have among our agencies in terms of driving this work. So we always try to end on time. So I'm going to give you the final word here as the task force's new leader.
Hey, thanks so much, Wade, and everybody. And exactly what I was thinking, like so much work that's happening. We got big challenges, but obviously we have a lot of energy and resources that we can put to it. And I'm just going to end on Kaylee's statement, people coming together to solve problems. That's just really what it is. And it's big, but we got a good 360 view on our opportunities. And I know we can meet the challenges that we've got ahead of us. We just keep working together. So look forward to the next task force meeting, definitely. Thanks, Wade.
Thank you very much. And for everybody, you should get follow-up information, including hopefully the PowerPoints. If you have any questions or suggestions around the structure or form of these meetings or anything we discussed, please be in touch with Patrick. Huge thanks to those of you who serve on one of our many working groups of the task force that are driving this work forward. And we look forward to featuring and highlighting your progress in meetings to come. Thanks so much, everyone. Stay safe.